All right, welcome to this session, the first session of this World Anti-Bullying Forum. This is the second of its kind that is being held in Sweden and the third in total. The last one was held in Dublin in 2019, and we're very happy to be able to hold it this year. It turns out that it can be quite a challenge to try to have a conference during a pandemic or the end of a pandemic, hopefully. So the planning process has been a struggle, and we're very happy to be able to hold it still. My name is Patrick Konde, and I work at Friends, and I will be co-hosting this session together with James O'Higgins, who is joining us from Dublin this morning. And so this pre-conference is on the is called Bullying and Migration, Racism, Integration, and Inclusion. And we will have the chance to listen and interact with some distinguished speakers today. So I'm very happy to be here and to be able to hold this. Sadly, due to the current state of the world, we had a lot more researchers that were going to be part of this session, but they can unfortunately not join us, which is, of course, sad news. We're very happy to have the people that we have here in person here today. And I think that I will be giving the word over to James now to give us an introduction of what it is that we're going to be doing today. Hello, James.
Patrick, are you receiving me loud and clear in Stockholm?
Yes, we can hear you.
That's great. Good morning to you and everyone there. And good morning to everyone who is joining us remotely from around the world. And congratulations to you and all the team in Stockholm for putting this World Anti-Bullying Forum together, the third WABF, in the most challenging of circumstances. So I want to congratulate you and all of the team there. I wish I could be with you this morning, but I'm certainly with you in spirit, and thanks to Zoom remotely as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So when we were planning WABF 2021, we wanted to ensure that this global event was relevant to issues that occur in societies and schools. After much consideration, it was decided that a pre-conference session on racism would be a very appropriate thing to have, particularly given all that has happened across the globe over the past few years. Despite the introduction of progressive anti-racist and equality legislation in many countries, racism still occurs in everyday life across many societies. And sadly, as schools tend to represent dominant ideologies in society, racism also occurs in schools. This is linked to established overarching structures that are long established in our societies and takes many forms, not least racist-based bullying. So based on research from UNESCO, we know that globally 1 in 3 children experience bullying and violence in schools. However, the chances of being bullied are not the same for everyone. Research tells us that physical appearance and race and ethnicity are the top reasons why children and young people are bullied at school around the globe. Of course, racism is closely linked to migration sometimes, as well as other related issues. So racist-based bullying is complex and requires an urgent and significant response from researchers and practitioners from all disciplines and fields to work together to tackle and prevent racist-based bullying. One such response that is currently trying to facilitate a collaboration on bullying, migration and integration and racism is the European Cost Action on Transnational Collaboration on Bullying, Migration and Integration in Second-Level Schools, otherwise known as TRIBES. In my role as UNESCO Chair on Bullying and Cyberbullying, I'm privileged to also be chair of the TRIBES network. And I'm very impressed at the creativity and the initiatives that can arise out of the interdisciplinary and cross-cultural cooperation on issues like bullying based on racism and migration. So just a moment, I'd like to give a shout out to the Marcus Wallenberg Foundation, who have got behind World Anti-Bullying Forum by supporting this symposium to promote collaboration between researchers and various stakeholders to develop and improve research-based efforts to reduce racist bullying and improve well-being for students who experience migration and other students who also experience racism in schools. Before we kick off then, I'd like to just introduce you to the participants in our symposium this morning. I see that we're being joined remotely by Dr. Stefatula Koulis, who's a Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Oslo and a previous colleague of mine at Dublin City University in Ireland. I also welcome, who's I think in the room there, Dr. Ylva Bjereld from Linköping University. Dr. Niamh O'Brien is joining us remotely from Anglia Ruskin University in the United Kingdom. We also have Dr. Amelie Meehan, also from Dublin City University, who is joining us remotely this morning. I believe Professor Muthana Samara from Kingston University is physically present there in Stockholm. Welcome also to Dr. Selvi Bayram Ozdemir from Örebro University, who's in the room. Dr. Lael Wiltgren from Linköping University also. Looking forward to hearing from our colleague, Professor Peter Smith from Goldsmith University, and also in a moment from Emily Joof, who is a PhD at Lancaster University in the UK. Just want to also give a shout out this morning to our friend and colleague, Professor Hildegunn Fandrum, who should have been with us this morning, but due to her to family, an impending family bereavement, she's been unable to join us, and we send her and her family all our best wishes. So Patrick, that's me for now. I'm going to hand back to you then for the next section of the symposium.
Thank you so much. And I was just going to go through the schedule. So we've now heard an introduction from James, and we will be hearing from Emily Joof, a dear friend of mine, who's going to give us a personal narrative. As you heard, she's a PhD, but she also writes children's books on the topic of inclusion. So we're going to be hearing a pre-recording of her giving a speech. We wanted her to be here in person, but she's currently in Gambia, so she couldn't join us, sadly. And then after that, we will go to the questions from students. I will be talking more about that later. And then we have the research coffee, and that's going to happen downstairs. And in that session, what we want to do is that we want to make sure that everyone that's here can interact in an informal manner. So you get to speak with the researchers and test your ideas and so on. So that's happening after that. Then we have the 2020 sessions from Layal and from let's see, Sevgi, which is going to be really interesting to see, where they will be presenting their research. And we will have a panel discussion at 10 o'clock, which is going to be led by James. And then we have reflections from Peter Smith. So briefly, that is the schedule that we will be running through today. So now we will move on to Emily's speech.
Hello. It is with great pleasure that I join some incredible speakers for this year's World Anti-Bullying Forum. This forum is of particular interest to me as it offers the opportunity for practitioners and researchers, carers and children to join in this important conversation around anti-bullying. Anti-bullying sits very closely with inclusion, which is the focus of my work. As a professional, I work on inclusion within education systems and its links to violence in schools. For this introduction, I will speak on this year's seminar theme, Bullying and Migration, Racism, Integration, and Inclusion from a Personal Voice. This year has been an important year in terms of recognizing the nuances and redefinition of bullying and how it can be a precursor to racist acts within schools and communities. The links between homophobic bullying and racially motivated bullying, for example, are becoming more well known, which allows us to identify, acknowledge, and to act. I am a proud migrant. I am Gambian, Malian, French, Swedish. I have lived in 6 countries and I speak 5 languages. And I'm also a mother to 2 young children who were born and raised in Sweden. I must admit, I moved to Sweden out of pure curiosity. Happy in London, I was drawn to this country which boasts of feminism and diversity and gender equality. From the outside looking in, I thought to myself, this is where I want my children to be born. A place where my son can dance in a skirt without eyebrows raised. A place where my husband can cook and bake without questions asked. a place where my husband can enjoy as much paternity leave as I do, equally, a place where my daughter can aspire to leadership roles without glass ceilings. And so we moved. We started a family, and I realized I was wrong. As a new mother, I was routinely ignored in medical offices or baby groups. My children have been scorned, punched, and worse, made to feel like lesser humans before even the age of 6. Our experience is sadly not unique. In Sweden, Afro-Swedes are the Swedish minority most exposed to hate, and these hate crimes are characterized by high proportions of physical violence, which often take place in public areas, such as schools and places of work. I witnessed this firsthand in my first few years in Sweden, where I worked in a number of schools and preschools. The exclusion and bullying that I saw was strongly underlined by homophobia and racism. And what was interesting to note is that teachers were better equipped to recognize and address the former, but not the latter. I also found it hard to have conversations around race and discrimination. There was a general sense of racial blindness, amplified by the fact that Sweden had removed the word race from legislation and common discourse a few years ago. But bullying related to race continues to persist. In 2018, the Friends report noted that 25% of children in year 1 to 3 reported feeling worried about being alone and excluded during break time. A closer look as to the reasons why children were excluded or bullied in school, we find their country of origin and their ethnic background at the top of the list. The 2021 report showed that the figures remain much the same. Children tell us that they are systematically excluded. They tell us that demeaning and racist language is common in school, with the N-word being used frequently by children and adults alike with little to no consequences. And perhaps what saddens me the most, we find in the same reports that only 54% of children trust that the school system and their teachers would react and that there would be consequences to bullying. Children and parents tell us that there is a lack of support, training, and knowledge around racism and discrimination, which means children who are most victimized are often left without support. Every year, I get a pang of anxiety at the start of term. Every year, I anticipate the call or the message from another parent, another child who has been bullied, victimized, or worse, because of the color of their skin or where they are from. Every year, I dread the call from my children's school. Perhaps it is our turn yet again. What this means is that as non-white parents, we are burdened to prepare our children to respond to and defend themselves from racism right from the very first day. By the age of 3, my daughter no longer wanted to be brown. She wanted to be normal, so she could also look like a princess, because all princesses are white, right? By the age of 6, she was surrounded and punched by a group of children. Her hair has been pulled at, her nose questioned, her identity examined, but not once did an adult step in to defend her. The line between teasing and bullying, violence and aggression seems blurred at times. And beyond physical acts, our children's self-esteem and self-worth is at stake. And that is where I choose to act. Besides all I do in this sector, my children asked of me something that I never anticipated. They looked on the bookshelves and asked me where was their story. They were looking for reflections of themselves. And it was in that moment that I became a writer of children's books. Because beyond safeguarding their bodies and their right to safe and quality education, I also want to inspire their minds, to show them that their lives matter, that they could be princesses and astronauts, geologists and librarians. Despite what the media shows, we could be so much more, and indeed we are so much more. Bullying and violence in Swedish schools is well documented in academic and public institutions. However, gender and at times class are the most common lens applied to the analysis. This is of no surprise given the reluctance to acknowledge race within Swedish discourse. Terms such as racially motivated bullying and racially motivated violence in schools are equally new and yet key to addressing it. All children have the right to be safe in school and the right to receive appropriate support and help when needed. The education system must strive to counteract racism and discrimination while doing parallel work to build inclusion in the education community. Because our children matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for your contribution to this. Again, we're sorry that you can't be here in person, but we're very happy that you've been able to contribute to this still, and I know that you will be watching this afterwards, so thank you so much. And now we're going to be moving on to the questions from students. And as we were planning for this, me and James and my colleague Frida, who's not in the room right now, but she's around, so you'll be seeing her later. We were discussing how we could get kids to interact with this, because at the end of the day, that is the reason why we're doing all of this. This is because we want to be able to answer the questions that kids have and to help them navigate in the surroundings that they are in. And so we set up and we got the help from Neem, who is joining us from the UK today. And we set up to make sure that we could gather as many questions as possible from students. And now I'm in the terrible task of having to choose which ones that we will get the chance to listen to today. But I'm going to give the word over to Neem, who will hopefully be able to give us to give us an insight as to what, how the process has gone in gathering the questions. Is Neem with us?
I am, yes.
Yeah.
Hello, Patrick.
Hello.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Niamh O'Brien, and I'm an associate professor at Anglia Ruskin University of Social Inclusion and Young People. And over the past few months, I have had the absolute pleasure to work with some schools from around the world in order to ask students the questions that they would like answered in relation to bullying and migration, racism, integration and inclusion. I was able to work with a school in the UK called Chelmer Valley High School, who are based in Essex. I also worked with the King's Hospital School, who are based in Dublin in the Republic of Ireland, and the Sheridan School, who are based in Washington, DC, Virginia in the United States. The young people you're going to hear from this morning are aged between 11 and 18 years, and all from secondary schools. There are 3 schools of secondary schools. So I will hand the floor to them because I know we are limited for time and we want to get through as many questions as we can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm going to invite Mutana onto the stage as well as Ylva, and of course, as we said, Hildegund's seat is here, but she is not with us today, which is sad. And then we have the rest of our speakers with us online. And I will say also that you can have a seat if you want, and get microphones, perfect. I will say also that we had a lot of speakers from the United States who we wanted to join us, but due to the travel ban, they weren't able to get here. And then when we realized that for them, this would be taking place at 2 o'clock in the morning, we decided that they weren't going to be joining us either. So we're sad to have those circumstances, but we're still happy to be able to do this. And as we just heard, the questions are from children from 3 different schools, from the US, from the UK, and from Ireland. So here's the first question. Let's see.
Hello, my name is Mikhail Wasilius, and I'm 13 years old. Here's my question. Say you are a new principal of a school that deals with racism and bullying. what would be your first steps to address the situation? I'm also curious if and how you would maybe get the students involved through the process.
And added to this one, I will move on to the second one, which is this from Damon.
My name is Damon Green. I'm 13, and I have a question. How does the average school react when they find out bullying takes place? And what precautions they take from it happening ever again?
All right. So I'm going to give the first word over to Amy Lee, who I believe is with us as well. And see if we can get an answer. Is Amy Lee with us? Oh, she's not. All right. Hopefully we will get her in later. Ylva, would you like to answer the question?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for the question. It was a very good question. What would I do if I was a principal on a school that deals with bullying and racism? So I think the first I would do would be to investigate the situation a bit further. What kind of bullying and racism is it that we're dealing with in this particular school? And for doing that, I would probably use a survey that was sent to that all students would answer, and also the adults working at the school. And my next step would partly be depending on what the survey, what the answer said from the students and the adults. What kind of bullying was it? What kind of racism? Is racism something that is widespread among students, or is it only a few, couple of students that have these values, but they are very loud and other students do not speak up against it? So depending on that, I would carry out some interventions. And if I would involve the students, yes, I would surely involve the students in the process by starting by having their opinion on their situation at the school. I would also involve the parents. As the parents, in anti-bullying work, we know that programs that inform parents about the work, they have a better success rate than other programs. So I would inform the parents about the work, and also independently of what the questionnaire, the answer from the questionnaire showed, I would also look over the school policy to see how it is, to see what is said in that policy at the moment, and if it has to be updated, and also work with the school policy as a live document that clearly speaks out against racism and bullying, and instead talks about inclusion, and have this as a live document that everyone is aware of on the school. And after doing this, I would probably have a new questionnaire sent out to all in the school to see, has anything happened? Has anything changed? Is the situation as before? Well, then we have to do something new. But is the situation improving? Well, then we are on the right track. So yeah, that would be my first steps.
All right, so getting a bigger insight of the actual situation and taking precautions that are fitting to the situation that we have. All right, so yeah, I think we're going to be moving on from this one. Thank you for your answer. If no one else wants to jump in, that is, who's joining us online. It's too bad because I can't see if you're raising your hands or anything. So I think we'll be moving on to the next question then. Let's see.
My name is Damon Green.
Sorry.
I'm 13, and I have a question.
There we go.
Why do schools give similar punishments for chewing gum and racism?
All right, so we have a question here about the disproportionate punishment within schools. I think we're going to be giving the word to James on this one and see if anyone else can jump in.
Is that just a great question, Patrick? And I think it calls us all out as educators on how we respond to bullying and how we prioritize it. And it is like a constant theme that comes up when in our work with schools at my own centre here in DCU, where we find that teachers and school principals downplay the impact and the possible effect of bullying on students. I think this has to go back to teacher education programs. Not enough time is given on those programs, certainly here in Ireland, to educate future teachers about bullying and what a devastating experience it can be, not just for the person who's the target, but also it is a negative experience for the person who's engaging in the bullying and also for the bystanders, as we know from all of our research. So I think the reason that schools don't prioritize bullying or have a more proportionate response to it is that teachers and principals need a lot more education on bullying, going right back to their teacher education programs. But also we need, as following on from what was said a moment ago, we're also not listening to the students in terms of telling us what these experiences can do to them. So I think the answer to this question, or the answer to this problem, which is so well and so simply put by the student in that video, is that we need more education for teachers so that they don't give the same punishments for chewing gum and for bullying.
All right. Thank you so much. Is anyone else online wanting to jump in for this one, or should I move on? I can just say from my own experience working at Friends that sometimes when we're dealing with specifically racism, I believe that there is a problem with people not really having a definition of what racism is. And for that reason, you kind of end up in a situation where you're thinking that racism is not something that can be done by kids, and therefore racism can't really happen in schools. And it's not always that way, but I've seen that happen, and that schools will react in a way that say that maybe you're overreacting and maybe this is not really racism. And therefore, it's much easier for a teacher to say that you shouldn't be using chewing gum. But racism, we don't really have a way to address. So, yeah. All right, so, yeah. Go on.
I would like to add to the points that were mentioned before is the importance of the curriculum. And I think we should integrate these issues as part of the curriculum. It's not a one-off event or one-off mentioning it in a specific, it's important, of course, to have anti-bullying policies that are in a continuous basis are part of the curriculum as well. So to have these topics as part of the English literature, as part even of science and other topics as well, RE, religious education, PE, physical education, and so on. I think this has to be integrated along the year as well, because having a one-off event is not enough.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. I will be moving on from this one. Again, I didn't have the heart to take any of the questions out, so we'll see how far we get. So here's the next one.
Why is it that when people embrace a culture or religion, it is deemed unprofessional in the workplace or in education?
And I'm going to be taking a set of questions here.
One of the reasons racism still exists is because of the lack of recognition of the contribution of black and ethnic minorities. How do we change this so that ethnic minorities get the recognition they deserve?
So this is closely linked to what Emily was speaking about earlier about recognition of and embracing of one's own culture.
What is being done to improve the education system and how it teaches Black history so that we're learning a broader amount of topics, including topics such as Windrush?
And the last one on this in this set.
What is being done to ensure the education of children who've migrated from other countries to England for safety?
So we have here a set of questions revolving around recognition and around how some of our personal traits or some of our cultural phenomenon will be frowned upon when it's in a public session or a public forum. Maybe James or let's see, we haven't heard from Neem yet, so maybe Neem could start us off with this one.
Hi, Patrick. I think around this again comes back to what James was saying earlier on about educating educators, really about nearly an overhaul in the curriculum. A lot of the young people that I spoke to during this spoke about the fact that they don't feel they can be themselves in school. They feel that they're, like what Emily was saying in her video earlier on, they want to be normal, they want to be white, they want to be fitting in with the children that are there in the school. But actually, in fact, we should be embracing all of everything that makes us all individual, everything that makes us ourselves. And that includes not only our ethnic origins, but our cultural identity, our spiritual values, our, everything that makes us us. Children should be able to recognize difference in people as a strength of their character and not so much a weakness in their character that targets them as a target of bullying.
Thank you. And perhaps I see that we have Emily with us now and Sefetullah. Would you want to add something to this?
Well, the keyword of recognition, especially among ethnic minorities, is voiced up, especially by Roma ethnicity across Europe and other ethnic minorities like Irish traveler as well, especially the recognition of their space in the history. And one of the ways to recognize is to introduce them through curriculum and introduce them from early child education to embrace for the coexistence. And the word embrace, again, it is from the power perspective that one side should embrace the other. It's a matter of coexistence, so which can prevent or can reduce bullying among children.
Definitely, yeah. And so saying that having the school actually putting it in the curriculum will be the official recognition of something that is personal to you, perhaps, yeah.
Indeed, literature as well suggests that an official status, unless you are recognized officially, systematically by system, you will be exposed to bullying.
All right. Yeah, Emily, I don't know if you heard the start of the questions.
Yeah,
yeah, you did.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yes, it did.
Right.
Thanks, Patrick. No, I think Steph is absolutely right, and that's what the literature does suggest. But it's important to say that that's not just true of the formal curriculum, but also of the informal curriculum. So in the case of Irish travellers or Roma, they're the two that Steph mentioned. So what imagery we have on the walls of the school, are these groups pictorially represented? Their way of life. So in the Irish traveller, the old caravans that they used to use, are those pictorially represented along with other imagery on the school? Do they exist side by side? So it's in the informal curriculum as well as the formal curriculum. Thanks, Patrick.
I want to add a quick note. I think also the atmosphere at school, the schoolyard, the corridors, everywhere in the school should be integrating these issues. So, for example, I went to the school once and there were several flags of different nationalities of those pupils who are in the school. Also the word hello in different languages, for example. When I entered the airport in Stockholm, I saw pictures of different people who contributed to the society. So these things can be also integrated into the atmosphere of the school, schoolyards, corridors, also classes, and so on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll be moving on to the next set of questions now. Let's see if we can get the screen ready. All right. So we will be hearing from Ruby and then 2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Ruby Hurwitz. I'm 12 years old, and my question is, how can life experiences impact how you treat others, and what is the reason why most kids bully people? Thank you.
And then to the next question.
Why are immigrants considered different from others?
Hi, I'm Maggie McDonald. I'm 13 years old. My question is, because Ireland has so many minorities, what is bullying like in schools, and how do you make sure they feel welcomed?
So the first question about life experiences, and the next two about migration, which is a type of life experience. So I'm going to start with giving the word over to Ylva for the first one around life experiences and how they can influence bullying.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, life experience can, of course, have an impact on you, on how you behave, and how you continue your behavior to others. So, for example, how children that are raised up in families where there are violence, they are more likely to be violent against their peers. And the same goes for racism. Children that are brought up in homes that have very racist values, they are more likely to express these values when they meet their peers. So, that's my short answer to that. The other question was why bullying exists, and that is a very wide question. The question has very many answers. And I can say something short about it.
Please do.
So one of the most common reasons to why bullying exists, why someone bullies someone else, is that bullying has a social function, meaning that when I exclude someone else, if I am bullying someone else, at the same time, I am including others. So if we are excluding others that are different from us, then we create the normal us, a sense of normality, and normality is something positive. So by that, it is more easy to target someone that looks different, that appears different, that has a different name, a different religion than the main group. And I don't know if we should continue, because why someone bullies other, it could be a very long discussion. And there were other questions that the students had as well. So maybe it's enough.
Thanks. We have 3 days to try to answer that question. So yeah, we're going to be moving on to the second one then, that is around migratory or having being a migrant and why that is considered to be different. So I'm going to give the word to Emily to answer that question.
Sure, Patrick. And then Maggie went on to ask about why the situation in Ireland, that Ireland has so many minorities. I suppose the question is, the world is full of difference. And there's a huge richness in diversity. And the question is, how do we respond to that? How do we interpret that? And how we can make children then feel welcome when they are migrating into a nation like Ireland, which has a history of emigration. So in Ireland, really the tables only turned in the 1990s. So compared to maybe nations like Norway or Belgium or Germany or the UK, Ireland has a very recent history when it comes to migration, similar to Portugal, as a result of the economic boom of the 1990s. So in many ways, the differences have been interpreted. Ireland has had to try and learn from the experiences of other countries and to try to interpret differences positively. Now that's kind of an idealistic or aspirational view. But Ireland has also had a history since 2005. We mentioned the Irish traveller community, of turning the mentality so that difference is viewed as something positive. So how do we do that in schools, or how do we make our migrants feel welcome? And again, this is aspirational, this is at policy level. What's happening at practice, we know is not always the same. But at policy level, this real move towards what's called intercultural education, or a friendly learning environment, staff would refer to as atmosphere. And then how do we do this? Well, at policy level, there has been what's called a migrant bridging program. So to try to attract migrants who come to this country with qualifications in other professions, qualifications perhaps in education, migrant bridging program to attract them into education. So they will become part of the school system. Intercultural education is now a compulsory module for all initial teacher education. So policy level has to grasp this. But as I say, what's happening in practice then, that's really the next step.
Thank you so much for that insightful answer. And I myself am a strong believer that bullying and racism has to be understood within the context in which it happens. So, for instance, in Sweden, we have our history of racism, and that is how the racism is going to take place and those set of stereotypes. And you mentioned how we have different types of, or different reasons for migrating. And I myself have worked a lot with people who have migrated because they've fled from conflict, and how I think it's something that we need to think about and be mindful of when we're talking about what you bring with you in terms of psychological trauma sometimes, and what type of stereotypes are assigned to people who have come from a conflict, and what impact does that then have in the bullying that you might be subjected to in the next context. So here I am asking a question as well. Anyone want to pick up on that one? It looks like Emily. Oh, sorry. Yeah, me. Go ahead.
Hi, Patrick. Yeah, just something you just said there about, recognizing why people migrate or immigrate, whatever. And we've had huge issues over the years for people who've had to flee all sorts of persecution in their host countries. And I actually think the media have a huge role to play in this. We saw from the camps in France before people were trying to make that very, very dangerous journey across the English Channel to the UK, and being portrayed as people who are trying to come here to, take advantage of the NHS and take the welfare system and that sort of thing. And images of people on their mobile phones, for example, in Calais. But what they don't show is the fact that those people have potentially left behind their whole life in their own country and haven't voluntarily made this journey in the first place. So we have to start somewhere with that, and the media does need to take some responsibility around immigration and around not portraying immigrants as being a problem, but more about how we can welcome them and support them when they do arrive in their host countries.
Right, and I believe in that instance that they were referred to as cockroaches by one of the major newspapers in the UK. Yeah, James, do you want to add something to this?
Thanks, Patrick. I'm just thinking, as people are speaking there, those questions are kind of fundamental that the young people have asked there, and we could talk for 3 days, and we will talk for 3 days. But I think one of the things that we need to think more about is moving towards a more democratic understanding of education and schooling in particular. Part of the reason why people who are migrants or people who have different skin color or whatever it might be, are travelers, Roma, people, LGBT, whatever it might be. All of these issues are issues because we tend to have, certainly in the Western world, an idea about what a good education is. And that idea really is related to something and a model that comes to us from the 19th century, a model that we've inherited, where the kind of adults know best, the principal of the school knows best, the teachers know best, and at the bottom of the ladder are the students. and the parents, who, the people who ultimately the school is supposed to be created for. And I think that a more democratic approach to education would allow better representation in terms of curriculum, school atmosphere, school policy, and so on. All of these things we've mentioned. After all, our schools should, in fact, model a democratic society in which they are operating. But in fact, they are mostly run like small little kingdoms, with one or two people in charge making decisions for everyone else. So I think a move towards a more democratic system of education would address a lot of the issues that we're thinking about this morning, particularly for people who are identified as different. We shouldn't even be using that word different. They're just part of the school community, but they are identified as different because there is an overarching homogenous view of education that reflects those who are powerful in the school, and that reflects those who are powerful in society. And I'd like to see more done around that, and I really think it would make a difference in terms of addressing racist-based bullying.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next one then. Again, we have a lot of questions, so let's see. Oh, sorry, not this
Hi.
one. We've heard that one already.
My name is Mansi Patel and I'm 18 years old. My question to the panellists is, so many younger children face racist comments by their peers at school, most likely picked up from their homes or surroundings. What has been implemented to educate older generations regarding racism to prevent younger generations from using such prejudiced languages they've learned at home? Thank you.
So here's a question revolving around how the problem may lay in parents and people at home having a different set of values, and how can we influence that? I have a note here that Emily wants to start us off with this one.
Thanks, Patrick, and my answer will be short. Again, I'm looking at it from an education point of view and from a schooling point of view and school communities, and looking at it from a policy point of view. And in 2013, the European Commission did a very interesting study that looked at outreach to parents, and schools were fostering relationships with parents, inviting them into the school community, allowing them to become part of the school community. And this was across Europe. And it identified that this was an area that really needed attention. And we did a study last year, 2020, where we followed up various policies or lack of policies that had been identified in the 2013 study. And this area was still identified as needing attention and lacking attention. So my answer is going to be somewhat short here, in that this is an area that really needs to be looked after. And a wonderful way of helping parents around issues of language and issues of attitude, values, and I'm talking about all parents, is that they have become part of a school community. And we have seen in practice how that works, but it's very isolated practice. It's where a school of its own initiative will promote something like excuse the crude language here, but we have a little growing phenomenon in the UK and in Ireland of what are called stitch and bitch circles, where parents are invited in for sewing classes and knitting classes, but really the purpose of them is for the parents to get to know each other, to learn about each other's cultures, learn about each other's experience over a shared craft experience. And initiatives like that have potential.
Thank you. This was mentioned before by Ylva that programs that in some way incorporates parents are more successful. So yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that anti-bullying policies are, I think that the school should take the leadership, because we can't keep it vague who is doing this and that. So Peter and myself did a study about anti-bullying policies. The more detailed the anti-bullying policy, the lower the rate of bullying in schools. So we have to have detailed anti-bullying policies where the responsibilities of each one is detailed. The parents, the teachers, the head teacher, the anti-bullying coordinator, the children themselves, the bullies, the victims, and so on. So these things should be integrated into this anti-bullying policies, and education should be done to parents, children, and teachers about this anti-bullying policies, the content of it, what are the roles that if each one. That's very, very important. And coming back to the previous issue, I mean, difference should be normal. We should normalize difference. That each one has their own, culture, their own perception about things, and thus teachers should be educated about this, that there are different cultural differences amongst pupils in schools, and they should accept this as well as other children.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will be moving on to the next one. Let's see here. Oh.
How will you deal with racism and discrimination online?
So a short question about racism online. I have no notes of anyone wanting to pick this one up, but I know that we have James with us at least, who has been working with cyberbullying specifically. So maybe you want to start us up.
Yeah, I just love the way young people just call it, ask that question. It's just so to the point, and we should have an answer for that. And of course, the answer is just so complicated. The racism online is a form of hate speech, it's a form of bullying, and there needs to be different responses from different actors in order to tackle that. Education has to be the main perspective and the main approach that we take, and that regulation and that education needs to be a whole of society education. Going back to what Ylva said at the very start, that bullying serves a purpose in terms that can be a social purpose in terms of excluding and including people in schools, but also that's connected to that same process in wider society. And the online racism is another part of society where this can take place. So education it has to happen not just in schools, but with parents, as we've just said, and in the whole of society. UNESCO's scientific recommendations last year on the whole education approach to tackling bullying and cyberbullying was very clear that we need to have whole societal initiatives that tackle these issues. And the internet really, and what can happen online really shows the need for that. The next level then, I think, is we need to have a certain amount of regulation. Of course, this has to be balanced against personal freedoms. But if we have the education really strong and people are more self-conscious about how they communicate and what's appropriate for them to say online, I think then the regulation can be there more as a framework rather than something that's kind of Big Brother looking over our shoulders all the time. And then I think at the next level, we do need to have the possibility of punishing or making it a crime to do certain things online, to say certain things online. Of course, that should be the very last thing we need to do if education and regulation are working. So it's a whole system and a whole society approach is needed to tackle this issue, and there's a lot of work to be done there.
Thank you. Maybe Seth has something to say on this as well. Looked like you were nodding.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, I wanted. Well, it comes to the first. I will stick to recognition. In a number of countries where race or ethnic minority is not recognized, so if you're not recognized, violation of your rights is also not recognized. Let's say in a number of countries that if you are a Kurd in Turkey, racism towards you is not constitutionally or institutionally recognized, so therefore racism will not be reported to authorities. So similar cases happened years ago in Hungary to Roma people or in Bulgarian. So it is from the institutional perspective, it goes to institutional racism if we speak from the power imbalance perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just mentioning the legality of things is really interesting in this, because I believe that this is one of those arenas where society is lagging behind the technical evolution of things, because now you can subject people to racism in more ways than you were before, but we haven't put in legislation that actually meets this this problem. So we're going to be moving on again. Let's see. Actually, we will be going to this one. Yeah.
How can racism affect someone's mental health?
Short question. And again, no assignments to anyone. Do you want to take this? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, racism, bullying based on racism can affect mental health, of course, for the short term as well as the long term. It can affect the self-esteem of the person, how they perceive themselves, and thus this can also lead to other internalizing and externalizing problems such as depression, anxiety, even psychosis, thinking about this over time. And in some research, we also found that it can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, where the children can have flashbacks about these issues, and to less motivation in schools, less academic engagement, and thus this will lead to lower academic achievement over time. In some cases, it can lead also to suicidal ideation, thoughts, and so on. And there are cases which children has committed suicide as well. So it's very dangerous as well, as should be cared of and taken care of by schools, parents, and we shouldn't leave victims suffer in silence because the consequences are really so strong.
Thank you. You've started to answer the next question, so I'm going to actually play the next question because it's connected to what you've just said, if we're ready. And from Simon. Let's see.
My name is Simon Machado. I'm 12 years old, and I'd like to ask, what are the long-term effects of bullying? What are the negative effects that bullying can cause?
So it's closely related to what you've just said.
Yeah, I can add also to the long term, even in childhood, bullying in childhood can affect children when they are in adolescence period as well adulthood. So it can affect their functional daily activities with regards to school, but later on in the workplace. So it was found in research that these are related. Victims are more likely to have depression and anxiety, more internalizing problems, and bullies are more likely to have to be involved more in antisocial behavior. So there's a specific research which was done, found that those children who are involved in bullying at the age of 8 were involved in crimes at the age of 20. So it has long-term consequences, and the society should work on this. It's in the interest of the schools, the society, even politicians, the country, with regards to cost effectiveness, if they think about it from that point of view, that we should stop bullying early on in order to prevent these long-term consequences.
Definitely. I have 3 more questions that are closely linked to what we're speaking about now, and then maybe one of you online can jump in. We're moving.
Hello, my name is Miles. I am 13 years old, and I have a question. In what ways does bullying impact a student's learning?
So there we have the learning process, because you're part of a school and the learning. Then the next question is this. Let's see.
Hi, my name is Hilda Elmaya. I'm 15 years old, and I was wondering, how do you help victims recover from the trauma of bullying?
So the recovery process, how do you help them recover from bullying? And then lastly.
Hi, my name is Kevin Bello. I'm 15. And my question is, how do you get people to open up and discuss about being bullied in schools?
All right, so any of our participants online that want to pick these up? So first the learning, and then how do you help people recover, and how do you help people open up and discuss?
I'm happy to take. Yeah. Oh, Steph, you go first. Okay.
Sorry, you may. Okay. One of the consequences that observable among ethnic minorities is internalization of bullying behavior. Internalization ends up with self-degradation, and even considering the ethnic origin as the reason, the cause of being bullied. So expressing with words that I deserve this, and then some of ethnic minority students find themselves in a vicious cycle looking for social acceptance from ethnic majority, and it makes them to expose to more and more bullying, verbal and physical. As for how to recover from bullying, the observation among the Roma students is to embrace, instead of being ashamed of their own ethnic identity or history, embrace their family values like collectives, caring, embrace their ethnic identity as it is, not as animosity against ethnic majority. Those who are a number of Roma students that observe and talk in Ireland, who were born there and who embrace both, because it's a reciprocal relationship, embracing their own identity and the ethnic majority identity, helped them to have a sense of value, to be valued and to value others, and it helped somehow to maintain their emotional health.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for starting that, Seth. I was just thinking really in relation to the impact that it has on education. As Seth has already pointed out, it's around that internalization and feeling that they are more or less responsible for the bullying. When children are bullied at school, there's an impact in terms of their attendance. They start to avoid going to school, they start to avoid going to classes for fear of bullying happening. Some research carried out here in the UK by the Anti-Bullying Alliance in 2019 identified that 11% of surveyed children stopped going to school as a result of bullying, and 19% had avoided social situations and online contact with friends as a result of bullying. But there's also the impact it has on their educational attainment and their education achievement, should I say. Further research conducted here by the Department for Education found that students who were bullied at 14 were more likely to be bullied at 16, and were also less likely to do well in their exams that they take here in the UK at 16 as a result of the bullying that was happening. It can also have an effect on their concentration within the classes, fear of what is, maybe they're worried about what has just happened in terms of a bullying incident, or they're fearful of what will happen at lunchtime, break time, on the way home from school, etc. But another area that's quite interesting around migrant children in schools as well is things like what they bring in for their lunch in school, where children pick on them for, it smells different, or it is different, or that must be horrible. And that stops them eating their lunch, and it has an impact then on their concentration, on their ability to perform in classes. So thank you.
Yeah, and like you mentioned now, that a lot of children who are subjected to bullying will not be coming into class at all. And this is something that we've been thinking a lot of when we do our surveys in schools. Maybe the children that need us the most won't even figure in our surveys because they're not part of taking them. So that is another issue to get around. Yeah,
I just published a research on this specific issue, the relationship between bullying and academic achievement, and we found, doing a meta-analysis, that these were mediated by academic engagement. So those who are bullied or bully victims are more likely to less engage in the school, in the class activities and so on, less motivated. They have lower self-esteem, lower self-efficacy, which is the belief of their own capacity. So it affects their own belief on themselves and their motivation, and thus this will lead to lower academic achievement. Of course, being the school or the class, when they make the child feel different, not accepted, not part of the school or part of the class, this will have a cumulative effect or a double effect, and thus this will be more it will affect more those who are bullied because of racism.
Right.
I would like to, Mostanna remind me about academic resiliency perspective. This happens, low achievement happens when there is lack of support from teachers, from school principal. And if they are valued or supported by both parents and teacher, they might show resilience against bullying and be successful despite. So bullying can be a risk factor that strengthens the potential of students where they feel valued or they feel cared.
Yep. Yeah,
thank you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I have two sets of questions that I want to get to. Let's hope we can do so. So here are 4 questions coming from the US about kind of the personal engagement of things.
Hi, my name is Jakob Nielsen. I'm 13 years old. I was wondering how we can educate people to stand up when someone's getting bullied as a bystander. And also, I was wondering how this could impact a bully's behavior.
And then...
Hello, my name is Hadley. I'm 12 years old. My question is, if we see our friends or peers getting bullied, what can we do to support them?
Hi, my name is Sander Kearns and I'm 13, and I'm wondering how to stop people from saying mean things but stay friends with the people who say it. Thanks.
And then lastly, this one.
Hi, my name is Gia. I am 12 years old. My question is, if I see my friends bullying either one of my friends or one of my peers, what should I do?
So there we have 4 questions around what you yourself can do in a situation, and also about how you can educate people to become upstanders rather than bystanders. Anyone want to take this one? Yeah. Yes?
Well, I think, again, the school should take the leadership here and initiate peer support and mentoring schemes in the school where children can support their peers. So we should encourage children to stand up for their peers, speak to the bully, or support the victim, to encourage the defenders, but also to encourage the possible defenders, because there are possible defenders who are scared or afraid to stand up for the victim, but they don't do so. So these initiatives are very, very important, the peer support schemes and the mentoring schemes.
Yeah, and I agree in that, and I would also like to add that you can teach the bystanders, the other students that are watching bullying incidents, that for different reasons they might not want to say stop to the bully. They might not. They might be afraid for the bully. They might be afraid that they will be bullied themselves. But we can teach them to do other things instead, that they can go and get a teacher, or at least afterwards, after the incident, they can stay and say something to the victim and help the victim afterwards, or by other means show that they do not think that this is funny, they don't laugh at a racist joke, and so on.
And connected to what you're saying now, the last set of questions is actually quite connected to this one, so I'm going to make sure that we get through them. Let's see.
I'm Evan, I'm 13, and my question is, at what point does conflict between students become bullying?
And then the last one.
Hi, I'm Sarah, I'm 17 years old, and my question is, what is the line between joking and bullying?
So what you were mentioning now, between the line of bullying and, do you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, I can continue. So I think that these questions comes from, sometimes it can be difficult to see, but what is okay and when have this become bullying? When has this gone too far? And when it comes to a joke, for example, well, if everyone thinks it's funny, then it probably is a joke. But if the joke is about someone, or if someone is not thinking that this is funny, but this joke still continues, and this joke is told several times, maybe in different variations, then we're starting to come close to bullying. And also the power imbalance, which is a key component. So if there are several students that are telling these jokes and laughs at these jokes, and the one that this joke is about has problem to defend him or herself, then it has become bullying.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone from online who wants to say something on this one? We have time for one more speaker, and then I have to call it.
Patrick, I was struck when I was reading the questions of the real sense of authenticity that came from this set of questions. You know, and even when the students were reading them out there, there is no doubt that this is a matter of concern for students. How do you support the bully without being a snitch? You know, how do you stand up for the bully without becoming a victim of bullying yourself? And that is it's not an easy question. It's not an easy one to answer. The place where we talked about peer support, another area that can be helpful is where younger students are paired up with an older student in the school in a buddy system. So rather than having to report it to a teacher or go get a teacher, because students don't want to do that, especially our high school students, our 12 to 18-year-olds, they do not want to be the snitch. But if they have a buddy, an older buddy, that sometimes is easier. It's sometimes an easier step to take.
All right, last one, Neil.
Sorry, just coming in, I completely agree with what Emily is saying there. But there's also evidence to suggest that when schools involve the students in defining bullying for the school and being actively involved in setting the anti-bullying policies, students begin to take ownership actually within the school, and they begin to realise that fine line, as we spoke about, between bullying and banter and bullying and joking. And they begin to realise that, you know, this is not the type of behaviour that we want to accept in our school. And if one or two students within a group can stand up and say, this is not okay, others are more likely to join that. But it's just getting that inroad to get those students to say, you know, this is not okay. You know, you can't treat people this way, or get the support or get the help they need. But certainly involving students in deciding, you know, which behaviours and what needs to happen when bullying happens in our school can go a huge way in terms of reducing it in a school.
Thank you so much. And I will let you know that we've gotten the chance to hear from all of the children who sent in questions. I'm very happy about that. The seminar is going to go on after a break now, and we will be back at 9:40. I'm not going to attempt to calculate what that means for you guys joining us online. But thank you so much to all the children who sent in questions, and thank you for answering the questions. I hope that this will influence our panel discussion later as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back. For those of you who are here in person, I know that I said that it was downstairs. It wasn't downstairs. It was on this floor, on the balcony. But thank you for being back. And now we're going to move on to what's called a 2020 session, and it's a really interesting format in which researchers get the opportunity to present their research within a specific time frame. So it is that you get 20 seconds per slide in the presentation and 20 slides to present your research. So it's quite a difficult task, but we will hear from to our researchers now. And I got a really relevant question during the break from someone who had been taking pictures of the children's questions before about whether we have consent in spreading them. And I've heard word now that we actually do, so you're fine to spread this if you want to. Thank you for that question as well. So I'm gonna invite Layal up to the stage. Round of applause.
Okay, the seconds are ticking, so I better get started. My presentation is called Polite Exclusion, and I will start with saying just a few words about this term that I've coined, and it is the subtle, often unconscious and nonverbal avoidance, distancing, and rejection directed towards minority and everyday school life. And the This presentation will focus on the discrepancy between school staff's view of a permissive, inclusive classroom climate and high-performing minority students' stories of polite exclusion. And the study is based on participant observation in a secondary school, interviews with students as well as staff. So I will start with how the principal describes the class, and she says, I believe the integration, the understanding of others, and the level of tolerance are huge. I think that's amazing. You understand that other people's experiences and viewpoints add something. You become enriched by them and develop. And I will continue with a Swedish boy, a kind and nice boy I call Edvin, and he says about this class, I think this is a dream class. It is by far the best class I've ever attended. We're like all very, very equal. There isn't like some on top and some on the bottom. And now I will show some contrast from students with minority backgrounds in the same class and how they describe the social environment in school. I'll start with Hassan, who says, you have to make a great effort. You have to change yourself. You have to change your personality. And I ask to what? To what they are. I don't know what they are. And I will continue with some other excerpt from the students with minority background. Emmanuel says, Swedish people want to have their word. They don't talk to you. Like you probably have seen that in every class. There's like the foreigners and the Swedish. And this was actually something that struck me the first time I entered the classroom, that the students were sitting segregated with students with migrant background, who usually were a bit darker in the skin, and Swedish people were sitting segregated in classroom. Christine says, they won't let other people, unless you're Swede, to be in their group, so I think like that's kind of segregation. They always stick together. I haven't yet seen some of the people in that circle come up to anyone else other than that circle and say, hey, good morning, what's up? Is that they think that we're weird, we're not Swede enough? If you start asking questions, for example, they will just answer with really short answers and end the conversation, says Joseph. They would just give a yes or no answer, but they wouldn't take the conversation further. They give off the vibe that they don't want to talk to you. When it is extremely necessary, they will have to speak with me during group work and stuff like that. And Ali describes it in metaphoric terms. He says, you knock on the door and they open and then they close immediately, like a door slams in your face. And I was wondering how teachers and school staff could miss out on all of that. That was so apparent from the first time I entered the class, and all these stories that I heard from students with minority background. And when I interview one of the teachers, she says like this, I don't see their dress, the Muslim girls. I really don't. I don't know your thoughts on this, but I have no reason to pretend. These are my true feelings. When I talk to them, I really see their personalities. And it surprised me too when I realized that I don't even see. And I ask that you as a teacher see them as individuals and not, yeah, exactly, and not as part of a group, that you're a girl, you're Muslim, you're Somali. You don't see their group affiliations, I ask. Exactly. When I'm engaged with something, it struck me after a while that, wow, how many nationalities we've got here. But I don't see it. And I ask, how can you not see it? I understand, she says, but you became engaged when you, just like you and me, talk and discuss. I barely see you, she says. So, a bit about my result. Formal inclusion do not necessarily lead to social inclusion. And the staff failed to notice painful experience of exclusion due to their colorblind approach. They don't see color, and therefore they don't see the exclusion going on in their class. And despite causing confusion, sadness, self-doubt, and frustration, no one opposed or protested among the excluded students, because it's difficult for individual students to address problems that are invisible to their teachers. And there is a risk that the student who raised the problem will be regarded as problem themselves, as individuals who see racism where there is none, and ruin the good atmosphere in classroom. And what we do have to remember is that racist processes do not have to begin with racist intentions as they become racist through their effects. And therefore, it is also crucial to investigate how certain actions are felt and received rather than the intention of those imposing them. And I asked the students with minority background why it is so important for them to be able to come to talk to students with Swedish background, and several of them answers something like this. They say, they are our future, they are the leaders of tomorrow. What will happen to society if they only stick together? And this is a high-performing classroom with students with really high ambitions, and they tell me that they are aiming for leading positions in society, and therefore Alice says that they are our futures and they are the leaders of tomorrow. So, any questions?
Well. Thank you so much for that. Very interesting to hear. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Swedish context, this dichotomous way of speaking about Swedes and other is quite common in schools.
It is.
So yeah, do we have any questions from anyone here? Yes, we have one over there. I'll repeat the question. So.
How I feel about it? Well, it makes me feel sad, of course, because these were processes that I could observe, but I didn't want to make a point out of it because I was interested on how the students were receiving the processes that I was observing. Yeah, it made me sad and also frustrated. And when I talked to the teachers, no one had. They were all talking about the class as and very accepting, tolerant, and they were nice to each other. And yeah, so I was also sad to see that the teachers did not see these processes, and that is why I call it polite exclusion.
All right, thank you. I think that's all we have time for. But thank you so much. Another round of applause. Yeah, and during my time at university, I wrote about similar things, and I spoke in that about how the researcher and the way that people will connect to the researcher will give you different results. In terms of being non-white Swede myself, people felt more emboldened to speak about how you were part of being the outsiders, kind of, and that gave a lot of different results from what a white researcher would have gotten in Sweden. Welcome up, Sevgi. Another round of applause. I will give you the chance to tell us what you will be speaking about before you start your clock.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here today. And I'm from Örebro University, and I will be presenting one of my recent work related to bystanders of ethnic victimization. And in this work, I specifically focus on the reinforcers of ethnic victimization as well as passive bystander. And in terms of the predictors, we were interested in moral disengagement and the class climate. As we all know, today's youths are living in a very increasing and diverse environment. And this brings opportunities, but at the same time challenges. A recent report by the Public Health Agency showed that 1 in 5 children with immigrant background in Sweden, they reported that they experience negative treatment because of their ethnic or cultural background. And it's not very surprising to see that these negative experiences have lead to problems in psychological functioning and at the same time school adjustment of these young people. And these experiences all at the same time open the door for engagement in violence and delinquent behavior. So who are the perpetrators of ethnic victimization? We know little little about the perpetrators of ethnic victimization. So what we know is that young people who have negative attitudes towards immigrants, young people who have high levels of moral disengagement and low level of empathic concerns are the ones who go and victimize their peer because of their ethnic or cultural background. So when we think about ethnic victimization, perpetrators and victims are the two main actors. But a large group of young people are neither the perpetrator nor the victims. They are rather bystanders. And some of these bystanders may take action to support the victims, but others may ignore the situation, or they may directly or indirectly support the perpetrator. And because of that reason, it is very, very crucial to understand the bystander in order to prevent the occurrence of ethnic victimization in different school settings. To keep in that mind, what we did in our work is we tried to understand youth's intended reactions to ethnic victimization, and we focused on the reinforcers and passive bystanders of such incidences. We have combined two different theoretical perspectives. At the individual level, we look at whether moral disengagement play a role, and in addition to that, we also looked at what about the classroom context. And when it comes to classroom context, we were particularly interested in understanding interethnic contact norms in class and teachers' approach to ethnic victimization, namely their non-tolerance to ethnic victimization. So the study comes from the Youth and Diversity Project, and then in this study we were particularly interested in 7th grade students. So what did we find? When we look at the reinforcers of ethnic victimization, we found that females and young people with high openness to diversity, they were less likely to reinforce the perpetrator. But on the other hand, morally disengaged adolescents were more likely to reinforce the perpetrator. And more importantly, I think that this is what I want to emphasize here. When morally disengaged young people, when they perceive that their classmates are open to diverse views, and then when they perceive that their classmates are being respectful to each other in terms of their cultural values and so on, they were less likely to reinforce the perpetrator. So in addition to that, at the classroom level, we also find out that when teacher made it clear that no one can make negative comments about others, young people had less intention to watch the situation and laugh. So when it comes to the perpetrator of, when it comes to the passive bystanders of ethnic victimization, we see the same pattern there as well. So females and young people with high openness to diversity, they were less likely to act as nothing had happened. And then when it comes to the moral disengaged young people, they were the ones who were actually acting as nothing had happened. And then when we examine the classroom level factors, what we see is that none of the classroom level factors play a role in passive bystander behavior. So what are the take-home messages here? The first take-home message is that both individual and contextual factor seems to contribute to reinforcement of ethnic victimization. More specifically, morally disengaged young people are at risk for being reinforcers of ethnic victimization. Probably when people deviate from morality, they attribute the responsibility to the victim. And they they underestimate the consequences of ethnicity-based bullying, and because of that reason, they may be more likely to ignore the situation and engage in behaviors which support the bullies. The second take-home message is that morally disengaged students' perception about the class climate matter when it comes to how they respond to ethnic victimization incidences. So what does that mean? That means that creating a class environment where diverse views are valued and appreciated may be the key to intervene with morally disengaged young people's intention to reinforce the bullies. And then we also see that teachers' clear message of no tolerance of ethnic victimization have the potential to prevent youth's intention to reinforce the bullies. So probably when teacher set the criteria in terms of no tolerance to ethnic victimization, young people may question the acceptability of such behavior, and they may be less likely to mentally justify it. And then when it comes to the passive bystanders of ethnic victimization, we see that individual factors plays a role more than the class context. So what are the implications of our work? The first implication is that there's a need to identify ways to intervene in the maladaptive cognitive processes of young people that deviate from morality. And then the second implication is that we really need to put a focus on diversity and inclusion in teacher training, and at the same time promote cultural competence and conflict resolution skills among teachers. Before I end my presentation, I would like to thank all the schools and all the participants and teachers for the participation. Now I think that I can take the questions.
Thank you. I think it was the second when you were supposed to be done.
Okay.
Great job.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I think we have time for one question. Do we have a question? Does not seem like we have a question. Everything was crystal clear. Good job.
Thank you. Yeah, Simone.
Yeah. So it's a question about possible interventions.
Yeah. Well, I think that we can take that in two different ways. So one thing is that from this particular study, it's very clear that disengagement from morality plays a critical role. So I think that in the intervention, there should be a component related to morality. So that should be one thing. And then the other thing is that maybe we don't see so much effect of the class climate when it comes to passive bystanders of ethnic victimization. But when we look at the reinforcers of ethnic victimization, we see that, for example, interethnic contact norms in class matter. What does that mean? That means that in the intervention, there should be a component related to diversity and inclusion. So the combination of the two may be the best way to go.
All right. Thank you so much to the two of you. Another round of applause, and then I will invite Mitana and Ylva back.
Yeah.
All right, so we're moving on to our panel discussion. So I was thinking that since I got a question about whether a lot of people were wondering who was who out of the researchers. So if I have James with me, maybe we can have a run through and let everyone present themselves so that we will know clearly who is who. And then we will do that while our participants that are here in person will get their microphones. Yeah?
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So I'm James O'Higgins Norman. I'm the UNESCO Chair on Tackling Bullying in Schools and Cyberspace, and I'm Director of the National Anti-Bullying Centre in Dublin City University. Go this way on my screen now, and you should have Niamh.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Niamh O'Brien, and I am an Associate Professor of Social Inclusion and Young People at Anglia Ruskin University, based in Essex in the UK.
So maybe go to Seth next.
Hi, my name is Sefetullah Kuldak. I am Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Oslo and Honorary Research Fellow at Anti-Bullying Center. And I have been working on ethnicity-based bullying and victimization. Thank you.
Seth and Amelie.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Amelie Meehan. Frozen. I work with the School of Human Development in Dublin City University, and I am also a research associate with the National Anti-Bullying Centre, centre that James leads in Dublin City University.
Right. Thank you, Amelie. Thanks, Patrick. Then you have the panelists there in the room.
Yes, and perhaps Mitana could start us off.
Yeah, my name is Muthanna Samara. I'm Professor of Psychology at Kingston University, London. and I do research on bullying and anti-bullying.
All right, Ylva?
Yeah, my name is Ylva Bjereld, and I am a postdoc researcher at Linköping University. My research on bullying and migration has mainly focused on the Nordic countries.
All right, thank you so much. And then, as mentioned before, a few of our participants are from Dublin City University, who hosted the last one of the World Anti-Bullying Forum. So thank you, and I'm going to give the word over to you, James, to conduct this session with a panel discussion.
Thank you, Patrick, and I hope everybody had a nice coffee break and some good discussions there. And the 2020 presentations were really insightful and great food for thought, I think, and a good platform for us to come into our panel discussion. And the symposium today is only a moment in a journey towards greater collaboration and response to the problem of racist-based bullying in schools. The conversations we had today will lead to even deeper engagement and follow-up that has still to come, long after we are finished here this morning. But for now, let us return to some of the themes that came up in the questions that we received from children and young people earlier on, and our discussion that followed that. And maybe our researchers will be able to shed a little more light on their responses that they gave earlier on. So I'd like to start maybe by asking Dr. Amelie Meehan from Dublin City University to broadly talk about the top level education policies that there are in place for newly arrived migrant students across Europe. And maybe, Amelie, you could say something about how the context of a country shapes that country's policies.
Yeah, thanks, James, and good morning again, everybody. Yes, it's an interesting one. My recent research to date has been in this area of policies and how context shapes policies. And even though there's a lot of discourse around policy, how policies are shaped by context is still somewhat unexplored. Whether local, national, or international, context does seem to shape policy. And the countries of Europe offer great diversity in this regard, with history, tradition, culture, economics, multitude of other factors influencing the context of national policy. And despite a shared European identity and the efforts of the post-World War project that evolved into the European Union, national contexts remain rich and varied, and there's a real richness in that. This does shape policies, including policies on migration and on newly arrived migrant students, often known by the acronym of NAMS. Referring to NAMS, it's newly arrived migrant students. When we talk about top-level policies, they can be categorized really in 4 thematic areas. And these are the thematic areas that were identified by a sort of seminal European Commission study in 2013. And they're the areas of linguistic support, so all matters to do with language, academic support. Sometimes it can include linguistic support, but that is a thematic area of its own. Outreach to parents. This is the one that's often talked about but forgotten in practice. And then intercultural education. So they're the 4 thematic areas that top-level policies seem to be categorized around. So, James, if I have time, I might just give a little example of how context shapes policies by choosing 2 of the countries that we studied. We studied a kind of a cross-section of studies of countries that had different relationships with welcoming migrants. Countries that were very new to this phenomenon, such as Ireland and Portugal. Studies had long histories, such as Norway and Belgium. We had a look at Malta, a tiny island nation, which has had a very intense relationship with immigration in the last number of years. And then we looked at Romania as a kind of an outlier, and that's where I'm going to start. So Romania, a former communist country, relative to the other European countries, it has a low GDP, gross domestic product. relatively high unemployment, a country of net emigration. Again, it can be unusual for a European country to display a country of net emigration. And as a result, Romania has very small number of NAMs, of newly arrived migrant students, a tiny proportion compared to popular destination countries such as Belgium. And of these, most are returnees. Most are Romanian natives who are coming back to the country. Now, they're still classified as newly arrived migrant students, but as a result, Romanian is their mother tongue. Many are returning Roma. And whereas the Romanian education system has a clear strategy for integrating vulnerable minorities, it does very little in terms of interculturality. You can see that, you can see why. However, because of its long history of providing access to education in their own language to the long-standing Hungarian and German national minorities in the country, Romania was the only participating country in our study to provide education in the public system in the mother tongue of minority communities. Now, that's an important point. Many countries are bilingual, officially bilingual. For example, Ireland is bilingual, Malta is bilingual, Norway is bilingual, but Romania is not officially bilingual or trilingual. But because of the long tradition of serving Hungarian-speaking minorities and German-speaking minorities, it does provide public education in these mother tongues to these minorities, which is quite a different situation than we see in other countries, where the mother tongue tends to get lost. The language support is in the language of instruction. So a lot of effort we see in top-level policies being put into students learning the language of instruction. There are various ways that are done that is done. For example, students our newly arrived migrant students being withdrawn from class, given intensive instruction in the language of instruction, and then reinserted back into the class. Now, that has the advantage in that it can be very intense and as a result, a very quick way for newly arrived migrant students to come to terms with the language of instruction. But there is a real downside in that they're being withdrawn from the class. So the socialization and the highlighting of difference, those things can suffer. A second approach we saw in our top level policies was to keep our newly arrived migrant students in the classroom. So a more immersive approach. The downside of that is that it can be quite slow. So there's no perfect, there's no magic wand, and we see countries at top level policy level trying to adapt both. A mixture of intensive language support while trying to keep the student in the classroom, socializing with their peers, experiencing the same educational experiences as their peers. So that was the Romanian context, and we saw how that context really shaped language support, academic support, intercultural education. At the other end of the spectrum then, Norway, with its low unemployment rate, steady GDP, low population density, and low incidence of contraindicators, such as early school leavers. Norway has very low population of early school leavers. It has long been a popular destination choice for migrants. And Norway is ahead of the posse in terms of top-level policy, because it has tried to deal with the issue of newly arrived migrant students by giving students the right to get instruction in all subjects in a language they can understand. That's the policy, that migrant students have a right to instruction in all subjects in a language they can understand. But how that has been interpreted in practice is not that the mother tongue is supported. It is that there is an even greater emphasis on our migrant students mastering the language of instruction. It reasserts the importance of mastering the language of instruction. So that would be two incidences of how context shapes policy. A third very interesting one is the situation in Malta. So it's a tiny, tiny island nation of a population of about 500,000 in the Mediterranean. And the incidence of immigration, has risen exponentially compared to other European countries over the last decade or so. And what's interesting about the Maltese context is that the number of newly arrived migrant students is quite low compared to other European countries, despite this influx of migrants. And our research showed that this is because Malta is often seen as a transitional country rather than a destination country. So the migrants are not bringing their children with them. And that makes, again, that can be quite difficult for schools because the children that come, they put a lot of effort into integrating and including, instructing in the language of instruction, and then the children move on with a whole new wave of children. So, and context shaping the policies there. It was also interesting. It's also interesting to see that policies have a cost. Well, writing a policy, but implementing a policy has a cost. And the countries with the most developed policies were often the countries with the highest GDP, the countries with the lowest employment rate. So we saw, for example, in my own home country of Ireland, where over the last 20 years, the boom of what we call the Celtic Tiger, where unemployment rate fell, gross domestic product increased. In that period of time, there were a lot of very far-reaching policies put into practice. For example, the migrant bridging program that I referred to earlier, where migrants who come with qualifications in education are really encouraged to become part of the education system by doing this migrant bridging program.
Emily, I'm going to have to just interrupt you there because I have to keep an eye on the clock today, but you've really given us an amazing overview there of top-level policies across Europe, and with good examples for us to think about from different contexts. We might come back to in a little while, and some of the other speakers on the panel might actually pick up on those as well. So thanks for now, and hopefully we'll come back to you on that in a moment, if that's okay. So turning to your recent research now, Professor Muthanna Samara from Kingston University. Although bullying is an international issue that we all know well, there are several issues with cross-national and cross-cultural and ethnic research that can make comparisons between countries and cultures and ethnic groups difficult. So the question is whether adopting instruments, anti-bullying intervention or prevention programs from one cultural context to another is right or not. We've listened to Amelie there in terms of how policies can differ and are influenced by context, but so is research and so are the instruments that we use. So maybe you might like to talk a bit about the likelihood or the suitability of moving from instruments and research approaches from one context to another.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. We did research amongst various countries, and we compared the bullying questionnaires amongst these cross-cultural countries with different languages. And we found that we cannot use, although these questionnaires were translated and back translated, however, we cannot compare bullying and victimization across countries because each culture has a different perception of bullying. Some cultures emphasizes more on racism, ethnic, maybe more homophobic. It depends on the culture and the country. So we did some statistical analysis and we found that the bullying and victimization, they cannot have one factor loading for all of the countries that were used in that study. So we used different really languages in different countries. So Germany, Palestine, Israel, UK, so different countries and different languages. And thus we concluded also that if bullying is perceived differently in different cultures and different countries, and thus we need to have specific anti-bullying interventions for each culture and each country. So we cannot really copy-paste other interventions, existing interventions, and come and implement these into these cultures and countries. We have to moderate. We can take some ideas, we can take some activities or some components. However, we have to adapt and change these to adapt to that specific culture and that specific country. Taking into account the language, taking into account how the culture perceives bullying. As we discussed before, you know, the difference between, or the definition of bullying, let's say. Some common definition says that it is repeated over time, it has to be intentional, and there should be an imbalance of power. So, and there should be an intention to harm the other party. So what's the difference between jokes that others feel that it is insulting for them? Also taking into account the presentation that was done, taking the views of the pupils or the children. So for example, we reviewed some literature about children who are Muslims living in a non-Muslim country. They said that children in schools, they are friendly to them. However, when they are met in public, they are ignored. They are just shown that they don't know them at all. Teachers in the class, they talk over them, and they have specific stereotypes against them. So these issues should be taken into account. I myself, for example, experienced these, and I emphasize the fact that we should hear the voice of the pupils because they know more than us. And they should drive our research. I'm so impressed by these questions. Some of these I didn't know, and I'm doing research on bullying, so we should take these into account when we do research because they drive our research, and they know better than us. My personal experience, for example, I am Arab Palestinian, I studied in an Israeli university, and continuously the teacher in the class made racist comments, racist verbal insults and so on against a specific ethnic group, which is I am from, although they knew that I'm in the class. So these stereotypes, and these cannot be known by everyone. These should be taken from the people who has experienced this. And thus, coming back to the original question, is that we should have a specific anti-bullying intervention for each specific culture and country. Taking into account the ecological model, the parents, the teachers, the school, and the children themselves. Because sometimes things start from home. As we found in our research, those who are bullied by their siblings are more likely to be bullied by their peers in schools. So this should be starting from the education from parents, in schools, in the environment of the child, in the neighborhood, and so on. And just finishing by saying that we should assure students or children that their cases will be taken into account. Otherwise, victims will continue to suffer in silence. So how we can make the victims to speak up, how we can make the defenders to stand up, is by taking these cases seriously and following up with them. Because victims suffer in silence because they don't feel that their cases are taken seriously by the school or by the system. Finally, we reviewed also laws and legal laws in the UK, and we found that there is no specific regulation or law against bullying, or specifically racist bullying. We should take into account that we don't want to criminalize children when they are young. However, these should be taken into account in the legal system. Just to summarize, is that each country, each culture has their own characteristics and their own perception, and thus there should be anti-bullying interventions that are suitable for specific cultures. Thank you.
Thank you, Muthana. I'm just thinking then, as you're speaking and listening to Amelie there a moment ago, is it possible then for us to if we were to follow the logic of what you're saying and take context into account, does this really mean that we need every school to have its own approach, to have its own research approach, its own policies, rather than focusing on the need for national? Or I'm just wondering, how far do we go with taking context into account?
Yeah, I think we should have. I mean, it will be difficult to have, a specific anti-bullying policy or anti-bullying intervention for each specific school. We could have a general one for that specific country or culture, but each school should insert in their anti-bullying policy specific things that happen in their school, taking into account, for example, what you mentioned about the survey. So we should do a survey in the school. We should interview children, take their opinion, and thus insert these into the anti-bullying policy of that specific school.
Very good, very good. And Amelie, did you want to say anything in terms about the translation of policy to the local school?
Yeah, I'd agree that schools have to adapt the policies for their local and individualistic circumstances, because it will, and the voice of the child is huge in that regard. I would agree 100% that the students know far more than we do, and the voice of the child, and surveying and honouring that voice in a really credible way is important, and then incorporating it into the school policy.
Okay, thank you both very much there. I'd like now to maybe move on to Ilva. From your research, has bullying with with children with a migratory background become more common over time? And if so, how can it be explained? And I'm saying migratory, but I also mean racist-based bullying. And how can it be explained? And what challenges do children with ethnic background or a migratory background meet when discussing bullying with an adult? Do they face different challenges to those, say, who are from the more mainstream population, if I'm allowed to use that term?
Okay, thank you so much for the questions. So the first question about if bullying has become more common over time for children with migratory background. Well, if we think about bullying in a national context, then we know that the level of bullying, the prevalence of bullying, it varies between countries. And in those countries where the difference between native and migrated children have been measured, the prevalence of bullying for these groups, in almost all countries, migrated children are bullied more commonly than the native children. But when it comes to studying bullying over time and the difference between migrated children and native children, then it is not that much research that has been carried out. In one Nordic study that I was a part of, we investigated the prevalence of bullying in 1996, and then we measured it in the same way 15 years later. And we could see that in 1996, in the 5 Nordic countries, migrated children were bullied to a higher level than native children. But 15 years later, we could see that the level of bullying for native children had decreased, while the level of bullying for migrated children remained at the same level. So the bullying had not increased. It had not become more common for migrated children to be bullied, but a gap between native and migrated children had become larger. And in a Swedish study where I have measured bullying using the Health Behavior in School-Age Children survey from 1997 to 2017-18, we can see that as bullying is increasing in Sweden in general, we can see that it is increasing for both migrated and native children. And the gap has not become wider, but so it's increasing for all children. So in that sense, bullying has become more common over time for migrated children, at least in Sweden. When it comes to the other question about challenges for talking about bullying, it connects what you said about suffering silence. So we talk about, we have a sort of a general strategy to bullied children, that if you are being bullied, if someone is saying something bad to you, tell a teacher, tell an adult. But we know that there are very many children that do not do this. And for children that have migrated to the country, well, or with migratory background, well, they face also the same challenges as native children, but they also have other challenges. As many children describe that when they are starting to being bullied, they have an initial period of not really understanding what is happening. Am I getting bullied? I who used to be this happy and strong person, and now something else is starting to happen. And if you do not really have the language, then this process can be harder to grasp, that this is actually bullying. So at first it's a longer process to realize that I am being bullied. And then we come to the second problem: who should I tell this to? And to tell someone about being bullied, it also connects to the question that one of the children had earlier, who asked, how can we make children to really speak up about bullying? Well, it is connected to have lower levels of victimization at school, because if you are in a school, for example, one student that I interviewed, he said that in the school corridor in his school, the students played Nazi music, and the teacher just walked past through. They didn't react at this. They didn't tell anyone to stop. And if they feel that at this school people don't speak up against racism, why should I tell someone that I am bullied because of my background? So that is one more thing. And children generally, they do not disclose being bullied because they fear the adults' reactions. And they sometimes think that they will not be believed. And if they are believed, the adults won't help them anyhow. And if they try to do something, it might not change the situation. And in worst case, it will get even harder for them in school. So migrated children might also have problems with the language and how can I express myself. Another student that I interviewed, he said that when he arrived to Sweden and started the 8th grade, he was late for one lesson, and the teacher was very angry at him and screamed at him in front of the entire class, and he could not find the words of how to say, sorry, I'm late because he did not know the language well enough. And this was also the same teacher that he was supposed to talk to if someone was treating him badly. So that is, of course, also challenging. And finally, just one more thing, that when we tell a child that they should talk to someone about being bullied, we know that a lot of children do not have these great relations to adults at school, but they might have a very good relation to someone at home, so they can talk to an adult at home instead. But for children with migratory background that maybe are newly arrived, it's not at all sure that they have the same strong family connections around them. So they might be more dependent on the adults in school. So the relation to adults are even more important for this group. And when the relation is not that strong, when the teacher might not intervene, when they see a racist, when they hear a racist joke, maybe even laugh together with the students before saying, "Oh no, that was not okay," then it's difficult for these children to talk about it.
Thank you, Eva. I'm just thinking as you're talking there, do you think we need to reorientate then our anti-bullying programs and initiatives away from where we are currently? We kind of say, well, the adults will ultimately sort this problem out, to in some way handing over power and skills and understanding and knowledge to young people so that they are more able to recognize, respond to, and report bullying, that it's more about how they are rather than how we are as adults.
That is a very good point. I would say that we should continue to encourage students to tell an adult, but I think we could also add something to that sort of advice, because it is not sure that you will be helped even if you tell an adult. Sometimes the adult will not help, and sometimes, not that often, but sometimes the situation will get worse. So I think we should add that continue to tell an adult, but if that adult does not help, tell another one, and also that we could find other ways to help the victim, maybe by including other students and so on. So we are not that singly focused on telling, that we should find other ways to also support these students.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So turning now to Dr. Sefatul Kuldas in Oslo. Sef, based on your research among the Roma community, can you talk to us a bit about the role of intra-ethnic relations and the impact on bullying behavior?
Thank you, James, for the question. Intra-ethnic bullying as compared to ethnicity-based, which is from the dominant group, is recent. Empirical research, empirical evidence is scarce, mainly due to measurement issues, which Mutana highlighted, measurement invariance, whether groups are comparable by means, and whether groups makes meaningful interpretation of the items. And intra-ethnic bullying is how, so we can ask a number of questions to understand intra-ethnic bullying phenomena. First, how do we define it, and what are the reasons and purposes of intra-ethnic bullying, and how to measure or conceptualize it, and how to prevent or reduce it. For the first question, how do we define it? First, it is a subsequent of a dominant norm-seeking behavior, which it is a consequence of ethnicity-based bullying from the ethnic majority point of view. And it is defined within and between ethnic minorities. Between ethnic minorities could be a group of immigrants like Kurds or Turkish students in Germany and Sweden, or Irish traveler and Roma. It could be within the same ethnicity like Roma in Hungary, a group of Roma who follow the dominant norms, Hungarian identity, who wants to be self-identified as Hungarian, and who wants to be self-identified as Roma. So the group that follows the dominant group, ethnic majority, might want to bully the one that self-identified as Roma. And what are the reasons and purposes for intra-ethnic bullying, how it occurs? It has moderators and mediators, which means reasons and purposes. Reason can be perceived misfit. A dominant group, the group that follows the dominant norm might perceive Roma as misfit, as deviant from the dominant group. And also that they can perceive as a threat to their existence within the dominant group. And another reason, they can demonstrate to dominant group that their own group is not a threat to their identity. Instead, they might direct their attention with the group self-identified as Roma. And the third reason is economic, is about to access resources or maintain resources. So therefore, they might consider self-identified Roma group as an obstacle for this. Usually, if there are, sorry to say, there are, the word usually, or I try to avoid generalization because empirical evidence is scarce. We have anecdotal and observational evidence. Among the observational evidence, social dominance, social power imbalance means when within the group is approved, when bullying Roma, self-identified Roma, is approved by Roma ethnic origins who are self-identified as Hungarian or as Romanian. So social power imbalance here means whenever they are also approved by the ethnic majority when the bullying behavior is approved. Perceived threat to social dominant status, competition for social dominance, and social dominant orientation are the purpose of ethnicity-based bullying here. Psychological impact of it, as we mentioned at the beginning, was internalization, self-degradation, considering their own ethnicity as the enemy or as the reason to be bullied. So it could end up with being ashamed of their own parents, try to be detached. It might weaken parental or weaken family relationship. And it can continue a persistent anxiety, which can end up in the low achievement. And a way to prevent, to reduce this one, as we have observed in Ireland in the context of Roma, is to embrace both identity, embrace their own identity and ethnic majority identity, not considering any of this identity as opposed to each other. To be Roma it's not at the expense of Irish identity, or to be Irish is not at the expense of Roma identity. When students, and especially adolescents, embrace a reciprocal identity, they feel valued and just develop intrapersonal assets against bullying. And also we have interpersonal assets as observational. We informal interview with a group of Roma children who were not valued or cared, or who felt not supported in a school. They drop out from it, but when they move to another district and feel valued by the school, the language skills improved, communication skills improved, they scores in maths and other subjects improved, and they felt included. So in this case means perceived teacher cares and perceived parental care together can be an external asset to protect, reduce bullying effect. And at the moment, the difficulty in measuring, how to conceptualize it, in measuring intra-ethnic bullying is to identify, to measure a direct link between ethnicity and ethnicity-based bullying, intra-ethnic bullying. Usually evidence shows the lack of direct relationship, but there is an indirect relationship. It might go through the social dominance orientation. It might go through the intra-ethnic competition for social dominant status to be included within the dominant group. It might go through perceived ethnic misfits. So, and also we have the classroom context, classroom ethnic composition. With the classroom ethnic composition, the proportion of an ethnic minority within the group, within the classroom, and whether if it is high or low, and most important, whether this is supported, ethnic diversity acceptance supported by institution. Institutional racism or institutional acceptance can be can be a leading or catalyzer of ethnicity-based bullying. And these are what has come to my mind so far. If you have any question, we can elaborate further. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. In relation to the composition of the classroom, is there a kind of an ideal number or an ideal composition that has been identified that can in some way inhibit intra-ethnicity-based bullying, or is there more research needed there?
On our review of literature, found no deterministic role, which means low ethnic minority, low number of ethnic minority and high number of ethnic majority doesn't necessarily lead to intra-ethnic conflict, or the opposite. So it might not be again the ethnic composition as a number, quantitative, but it could be about the perceived ethnic composition by students and school teacher principal. So far, I found no conclusive evidence. Our review found no conclusive evidence what number and what is the optimal proportion. But found if diversity acceptance, ethnic diversity acceptance is promoted formally or informally. But why formally is important? Because it helps to balance the power. It gives the basis for them to report. In case of Kurdish students or Roma students, Irish traveler students, when there is no legal basis, they feel weaker. They don't feel supported. They don't feel any power, even for the bystander perspective. We have some anecdotal evidence that a teacher or school principal might accuse bystander of provocating when they try to intervene because ethnic minority is not recognized. So it comes again from the policy perspective, of course, and informally acceptance from the society as well.
Thank you, Seth. Thanks. It's very interesting, and it's kind of something that is emerging as an area of research. So it's very interesting for us. So finally, I want to turn to Dr. Niamh O'Brien in Anglia Ruskin University in the UK. Given what we've heard this morning, Niamh, about how local context impacts on policy and the extent to which we can transfer research instruments from one context to another, policy from one place to another, and intra-ethnic relations. Can you talk to us a bit about any additional challenges related to co-research with children and young people from a migrant or an ethnic background?
Yeah, sure. So my research involves focusing on involving young people directly in the research process. And in an ideal scenario, young people are involved in designing the research and in setting the research questions. And involving school students in research has clear advantages in terms of students' agency and in terms of them having a say and adding to knowledge production. And involving migrant students in research from design to dissemination helps to ensure that the research is entirely focused on issues which affect them or that they have a clear interest in. But merely acknowledging that students have the right to participate and have their voices heard is not enough. Of importance is providing opportunity for these voices to be heard. And participatory methodologies have been particularly appropriate for the study of childhood and have proved popular in ascertaining student views and involving them directly in the research process. So turning to other research in the field, Blanda and Ottawa in 2007 found this to be the case in their work with a number of school student groups in Australia. They worked to identify the barriers preventing marginalised students from accessing third-level education. Using a participatory action research approach, they suggest that involving students as researchers can be one way to actively hear these voices, which have potentially been muted due to traditional schooling systems. Participatory action research, they argue, is intended to give voice to all participants and improve social outcomes. By working with the students in this way, the researchers argued that the students were able to identify insider knowledge about issues, including racism and teacher attitudes, which possibly would not be identified or reported to teachers. These findings, therefore, challenge school policies and procedures by identifying the problems faced by marginalised students, by marginalised student researchers themselves. Most schools in this project reported improvements to their school policies based on this and other insider knowledge obtained by the student researchers. Bragg and Fielding as well in the UK proposed that the involvement of students as researchers should not be a one-off activity, but should be embedded within school policies or within schools, so students can be viewed as resources and producers of knowledge, and not just passive recipients of knowledge. Involving students in research in this meaningful way enables them to contribute to developing their whole school and encourages them to question the status quo of the school. Research conducted by Manzoni and Rolfe in 2019 in relation to how schools are integrating migrant children and their families concludes that child-centred qualitative research has clear advantages in providing voice to migrant children to inform current policy, practice and debates in global migration and social justice. However, they also caution that researchers need to be mindful of migrant children's position within their families and society overall, and think of their participation as often hedged around by constraints and controls. So consequently, researchers need to be mindful of some of the following when they're involving migrant students in participatory research projects. First of all, we have adult assumptions, where adults assume what young people want and need based on their own experience, or maybe based on the experiences of other migrant students. For example, Seth has spoken about intra-ethnic bullying. It is possible that teachers and other adults might have a particular view on what racist bullying is, but might not consider the viewpoint without the input from other young people. They might not even be aware of intra-ethnic bullying, for example. It's important to remember that migrant students are not homogenous and will have different ways of feeling like they're being included. So involving young people with experience themselves can help to change these viewpoints and improve adult understanding. Adults' fear of getting it wrong. It's possible that adults are worried they will do it wrong, so as a result, they choose to do nothing at all. However, we know from research that students want to be asked their views rather than feeling that they're being muted. In terms of involving migrant students in research, like any students in research, there's consent issues. Seeking informed consent from parents and guardians can be problematic in research. But researchers need to be mindful about language, for example, as has been spoken about this morning. So, for example, if a family have migrated to an English-speaking country and English is an additional language, researchers need to be very careful that the information going home is mindful about the language and the sensitivities in documents that need to be signed. Power issues between adult researchers and student co-researchers always need to be ameliorated in participatory research studies. And when working with migrant students, we need to be mindful of cultural issues, whereby the adult is possibly seen as the knowledgeable one and the student is there to learn from them. Indeed, traditional Western concepts of education also has this view. In participatory research studies, everybody learns from everybody else. The adult will have the academic knowledge, but the students will have the lived experience and the contextual knowledge. Muthana alluded to this earlier in relation to the lived experiences that migrant and ethnic minority students have and how we learn from this knowledge. Indeed, Ilva pointed out that migrant children might not speak up against bullying, possibly due to feeling different as a result of their ethnic or cultural background. So involving students in research with adults exploring these issues enables this knowledge to be transferred from young people to adults and vice versa, such as help seeking, for example.
Niamh, I'm going to have to just stop you there just because time is moving on, and there's so many interesting things you've said there that I would love to have the time to follow up on, but I know that over the next 3 days there will be opportunity for all of us to follow up on some of the discussions that we've had this morning. So thank you very much for responding to my question there and for highlighting for us the importance of involving children and young people in research and the additional challenges that would be there. You're only getting into them, I know, but you've already flagged some important ones I hadn't even thought about. So thank you very much, Niamh, for that. And thanks to all of our panelists for participating in this panel discussion. I know it's somewhat stunted because some of us are in Stockholm, some of us are online, and it means that the usual back and forth we'd have in a panel discussion isn't as easy to have. But I do think that each of your inputs has been really, really valuable, and I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. So I'm going to hand back to Patrick now in Stockholm, who will take us into the next part of our session.
Thank you so much, and I think we should have a round of applause for your contributions. You can go. If you, and to wrap this up, we have Peter Smith, who will give us a summary of what we've heard today, and then I will give the word over to James again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Well, first of all, congratulations, I think, to Patrick, to James, to all of you who've taken part in this, actually, the speakers, the children, of course, who participated. I think it's gone really well. I was kind of wondering what a hybrid event like this would be like. It's my first experience being here in person, but also having the hybrid format too. And I think it's worked really well, actually. So although James and Neve and Seth and Amelie weren't here, they've actually helped the climate emergency, of course, by not flying, which I'm feeling guilty about. But I hope, that it seemed to me that we're having a good experience, actually, together. Also, thanks to the technical staff here, too. I see you've got an impressive bank of... Yeah, well done. So just a few comments, then, about what we've been listening to today. I think what really stood out for me was, in a sense, thinking about the ecological model, which Muthanda actually mentioned briefly, the sort of Bronfenbrenner model, where you have the individual and then the immediate social group, the family, the friends, the school, the society, the community and a wider society. And all these factors have come out, I think, in the presentations of material and questions that we've had. So, in a sense, of course, race and ethnicity is an individual thing. You are a certain race. But obviously all these other parts of the ecological system come into it very markedly. But one other individual factor that was mentioned, I think, was moral disengagement and empathy. I think that was Leao's talk. Hope I got that right. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Family is clearly important, and we heard about stitch and bitch, I think from Amelie. Stitch and bitch worried me a bit, actually. It sounded rather fierce. I'm not sure if I'd want to go to a stitch and bitch meeting. But if it's in a positive sense, if it's bringing together parents from different backgrounds in a common sort of task of sewing and so on, this sort of thing, obviously that sounds a promising kind of approach. And families are clearly very important in this area of attitudes to race and ethnicity. Siblings didn't get a mention, by the way, and we know quite a bit about sibling bullying too, and that's just something to bear in mind as well. Then the peer group and the school, really important, obviously. Peer support schemes were mentioned. Peer tutoring is another, I'm not sure if that was mentioned or not, but for example, Michael Bolton in the UK has done this. It's where older pupils, in a sense, tutor. Buddying was mentioned, but it's a bit different, tutoring. Older pupils tutor younger pupils in how to cope with bullying, for example. And younger pupils, if the other pupil was a year or two older, they'll really look up to them and respect them and might learn quite a lot from them. My colleague Noel Purdy in Belfast ran a project recently, which I was part of, called Blurred Lives, where we used quality circles as a way of involving pupils. Quality circles is kind of in the curriculum, where pupils meet regularly in small groups to discuss a problem, and the problem might be bullying or racial harassment or whatever in the school, and that's a promising approach too. Curriculum's obviously important, and that's where we come back to, for example, moral disengagement. And I listened to an interesting talk by Robert Thornburg at a conference just a few weeks ago, actually, where he was talking about the importance of moral disengagement. And that leads on to the idea of having in the curriculum some sort of education about this about moral responsibility and so on. And the school, we've talked about school policies, of course. And I think teacher education was something else that came out too. And by the way, I think we must try and be supportive of teachers. It's easy to be critical of teachers sometimes as not doing enough, but they've got a tough job. You know, and if you come along just saying you're not doing this well enough, you're not doing such and such, you know, not going to be awfully helpful. But if we can come in a supportive way. And teacher education is obviously very important because we know so much now about bullying. And even now I'm learning things. I mean, polite exclusion, for example, which was the other 2020 talk by Sevgi, I think I've got that right. That was really interesting, that a clearly well-intentioned school principal or teacher can think everything's fine, that there isn't any exclusion in the school. But when you get the voices of the pupils, then you're learning, well, actually, there is. And here we've got to kind of help, in a way, I think, teachers understand this. These sorts of things can be really part of teacher education. Society level, we heard quite a bit of that, I think, from Amelie, the way legislation, policies and so on can be important. And the media is important. And politicians too. I'm thinking about politicians quite a bit. I'm from the UK, and politicians aren't always very responsible in the way they talk about these things. I won't mention any names. But on the other hand, there can be some positive things, as it happens at the moment. 3 senior politicians in the UK, that's our Chancellor, our Home Secretary and our Foreign Secretary, all come from immigrant backgrounds, or their parents at least are from immigrant backgrounds. So they could be, in a sense, positive role models, obviously, for this kind of thing. I think the other point I wanted to end up with was I was very moved by Emily Joof's presentation near the start of this session. Someone speaking from very personal experience about her children too. And she made the point about racial blindness. This is in the context of Sweden. And Sweden, for me, is a country I admire, actually, where there seem to be relatively low rates of bullying. And as she said, you expect, ideas of gender equality and so forth. But it's a bit shocking in a way to find, nevertheless, these racial harassment is happening and it's not being discussed perhaps as much as it should be. So clearly I think we shouldn't be racially blind. We've got to really tackle these things honestly and firmly. And again, coming back finally to pupil voice, which Niamh spoke about very eloquently, I think, in that last session, and other people have mentioned too. Really important to get pupils involved in this. And it was very good, I think, excellent to have these pupil questions in this session to hear what they have to say. And this has been a growing sort of theme, I think, in the bullying research area. Many colleagues in Australia, too, who can't be here, like Barbara Spears, for example, have been pushing this forward very eloquently. And we try to take account of that in the Noel Purdy project, too, that I mentioned on the quality circles. So that's really an important perspective as well. I'm probably near the end of my time now. But congratulations to everyone again. It's been a really good morning, I think. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. And I'm going to give the word over to James to see if you have anything to wrap us up.
Thanks, Patrick, and thanks to Peter. It's really great to hear Peter's putting together of everything that has happened over the last few hours. I just want to say thanks to each of the researchers who gave their time to be with us today. I know that, like myself, many of us who are participating online would have preferred to have been there physically present with you in Stockholm, but we really appreciate the efforts people have made to ensure that this is a hybrid event and that we were all able to participate as we have done. I want to thank everybody who's attended the symposium this morning in Stockholm, there in the auditorium and online. I think all of the participants who have joined us today in Stockholm and online will have benefited from the input of all our panelists, especially the young people who sent in questions, as well as our three speakers. As I mentioned earlier, this is only a moment in our journey towards deeper collaboration and greater effort to tackle racist-based bullying in schools. I know that with further support from the Wallenberg Foundation and with leadership from UNESCO and the World Anti-Bullying Forum, that we will continue to make a renewed effort to tackle bullying in all forms, especially bullying based on race and ethnicity. So finally, though, I want to thank World Anti-Bullying Forum, Frida and Patrick, and all of the team at Friends for inviting me and others to join this symposium, and for all of your coordination and management of this symposium, but also for the wider forum. Organizing this event is, I know from experience, is never easy, but organizing it in a global pandemic is even harder. So you're all to be commended again for your efforts to ensure that WABF 2021 has happened. It actually has started and it has happened. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of today and the full 3 days of the event, and look forward to dipping in and out remotely from where I am here. Enjoy the rest of your morning. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. And that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you so much. And I'm going to try to fit as much of my new thoughts as possible into my 15 minutes that I have later today on the same topic. But thank you for being here.